Imagine a city cloaked in darkness. A city where things that go bump in the night are not only real, but they are everywhere. A city where monsters don't just lurk in dark corners or under children's beds, but live above all of us as powerful, omnipotent rulers. Welcome to Enoch. Welcome to Law of Darkness, a series where I, and my cat apparently, take a deep dive into the rich and complex story of the World of Darkness tabletop RPG franchise and present it to you in an easy to understand and hopefully interesting way. For those of you that watched the first video on Caine, thank you so much for your support. It's already done better than I thought it would. For anyone that hasn't seen that video yet, I highly recommend going back to watch that one first, because we will be picking up exactly where that one left off in this video. Finally, if you like these videos, please do consider liking the video on YouTube, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell so that I know that you want to see more. With all that said, let's pick back up with Caine's journey and talk about the first city of vampires, Enoch. When we last left our daddy of darkness, Caine, he'd just truly become a vampire and made his way back into the land of living. He encountered humans scattered all across the land, descendants of his younger brother Seth. Eventually, Caine wandered until he reached the gates of a city named Ubar. Ubar. This is a story about Enoch, isn't it? Well, when Caine first arrived at the first city, it was still named Ubar, which basically translates to Queen of Frankincense. When Caine entered the city, his power was so great, so palpable, so overwhelming that all the mortals within the city could see this power emanating from him, and they either bowed their heads or cowered before him in fear. Even after all the aeons that had passed since Caine left the land of mortals, everyone still knew of the mark of Caine and how it got there, and they knew that their lives would never be the same again. For his part, Caine walked up to the great palace, stood at the foot of the throne where the ruler of the city, named Enosh or Enoch, sat. Enoch, like the other mortals Caine had passed, saw the power that the Dark Father held, and he bowed down before him, relinquishing his throne and just gifting the city to him. Whilst this is an epic story and paints Caine to be an all-powerful being, which he kind of is, I don't think it quite went down like this, at least not as instantly as the Book of Nod suggests it does. See, throughout the stories, Enoch is known as Enoch the Wise. He's a strong king not because he rules with an iron fist, but because he does the smartest thing for his people. In the revised Toreador clan book, it said that Caine had walked the land of mortals for generations before arriving at the first city. He learned as he, brooded, and brought with him knowledge from Sumeria, such as the wheel and techniques on farming and irrigation that he himself first started when he was a simple farmer back before all of this happened. Having Caine as a ruler meant that the city would prosper like it never could under King Enosh. There is also the possibility that Enosh saw Caine, had heard the stories, considered what would happen if he denied the first murder of the crown, and wisely stepped aside. Enosh didn't give up his throne for nothing, however. He saw Caine's power and he begged him to share it. Caine was reluctant to do so, and even had another visit from Archangel Uriel, who reminded Caine that any children he made would inherit all of the curses that were put upon him, that being fire, sunlight, constant death, the need to drink blood, and just eventual doom. In truth, Caine was lonely. He'd walked the earth for so many years, watching the children of Seth die as he stayed unchanged. Eventually, he relented and embraced Enoch, making him a vampire. From this moment, Enoch became Caine's closest advisor, and Caine renamed the city of Ubar to the city of Enoch in honor of his first child. wasn't long, however, until Enoch felt the same pangs of loneliness that his father had. He wasn't happy being the only other vampire in existence, and presumably Caine spent a lot of his time off in a dark room somewhere, brooding and listening to The Cure and Depeche Mode. He begged his father to give him siblings. The seal already broken, Caine gave in to Enoch and made him siblings. Caine wasn't going to do this randomly, though. He was going to make sure it fit his purposes. He already had an advisor, someone that sat at his right hand. What he needed now was a sword arm. With this in mind, his gaze fell upon a warrior named Irad. In life, Irad was a cruel and bloodthirsty general. He was apt in waging wars against the various mortal tribes of the area, and his martial prowess and his ability to command those around him had gained him respect and position. Despite his bloodlust, or perhaps because of it, Caine saw these qualities and decided that Irad would be the perfect general to command his armies. He was embraced, and Irad the Strong was born. See, outside of Enoch's walls, there were monsters that even the vampires feared. Lupines, or werewolves, already roamed the lands, and various demons and demon-worshipping clans such as the Bali preyed on mortals wherever they could. There was also the other human tribes and civilizations that saw a city ruled by a vampire as an abomination and tried to eradicate it from history. Needless to say, there was no lack of enemies for Irad to pursue. Over the centuries, however, the bloodlust within Irad grew, possibly amplified by his transformation, but also just with the constant chance and opportunity for killing, he just reveled in it. Still, he was incredibly loyal to Caine, and as long as Caine provided him with a constant outlet to sate his need for bloodshed, he would stay at his side. There was still one more to join the second generation. Caine was still lonely. Despite now having Enoch and Irad by his side and a whole city to command, he never had someone that he could trust fully, not with himself. His eyes fell on a mortal woman named Zillah. He fell in love with her and embraced her so that she could become his wife. Now, things didn't go quite to plan here for Caine. A lot of stories in World of Darkness like to lean into the men treating women like objects trope, like this does here. I mean, it makes sense, I guess, when a lot of these sources are written from the perspective of a much, much older time, and a lot of them have quite archaic religious themes to them. But what I like about the World of Darkness and how they handle these is they also make sure that the women in these stories don't go down without a fight. They refuse to become objects of these men. They are, for the most part, absolute badasses, and Zillah was no different. See, when Caine turned Zillah, she had no intention of becoming another trophy in his case. She was a strong woman, an accomplished hunter, and she wasn't looking to sit next to Caine's throne and just look pretty for the next few centuries. She denied all of his advances. She outright rejected him, which hadn't really happened before as far as we know. It isn't mentioned if Caine used his powers of presence or dominate to try and control Zillah, but even if he did try, it failed. Zillah was too strong, too independent, and she wasn't going to just be Caine's wife. She was going to serve the city on her own terms. Like I said, she was an accomplished hunter, and she was even said to have the gift of prophecy. There was plenty that she could give without just sitting on Caine's arm. Caine, however, could not take no for an answer. He left the city of Enoch, looking for ways to change Zillah's mind. He eventually met who is only really referred to in the Book of Nod as the Crone or a Crone, who told him that she could help, but it would take time to find his answers. For 2 nights, she told Caine to drink some of her blood and come back the next night when she would have more answers for him. Caine, naive, maybe desperate, definitely took this at face value, and he came back each night and did as she said. On the third night, Crone told Caine to mix some of her blood with special herbs and then drink it, and if he did so, he would finally have his answer and Zillah would be his. However, in drinking the Crone's blood 3 times on 3 separate nights, Caine became victim to the first blood bond, which is a supernatural bond that ties one vampire to another. Caine was now trapped by the Crone, forced to do whatever she asked of him. Another common theme within the lore of World of Darkness is that characters are constantly sowing the seeds of their own downfall and then experiencing that in like a poetic, karmic way. Honestly, if we made it a drinking game for this episode alone, I think I'd be on the floor before I finish recording it. It happens all the time, and for the most part, it's satisfying. Just bear that in mind for the next part of this story. Caine becomes trapped in service to this Crone for a whole year. She gets him to do all sorts of things, most of which involve him giving her some of his blood so that she can perform experiments with. Anyway, after about a year of being in this bound servitude to the Crone, Caine had fought this blood bond and given it enough time that it slowly worn off to the point where he could at least make a plan to escape. He told the Crone that he feared for his life. He said that he believed his children would eventually turn on him, foreshadowing, and asked her for a way to protect himself. The Crone, having no reason to distrust Caine, believing him to still be her loyal, beyond a fault servant due to this blood bond, went to a tree and, get your drinks ready, carved a stake from its branches. She told Caine that using this stake to pierce a vampire's heart would paralyze them and leave them helpless. Caine said thank you very much, and instantly plunged said stake into the Crone's heart. This is kind of the evidence we have that Caine had turned her into a vampire, or she had done so using, a mixture of his blood and dark magic, and so stake met heart, Crone went down, just as she said it would. She was frozen, helpless, and again, this is something that happens within game as well. Unlike a lot of pop culture or vampire stories, a stake to the heart doesn't kill a vampire, but it will leave them paralyzed and helpless. So, Caine did exactly that. He pierced the Crone's heart, left her helpless, and just walked off, presuming that the rays of sun would finish the job. With his freedom, and this new knowledge that he'd gained, Caine returned to the city of Enoch and tricked Zillah into the same blood bond that he had been subjected to over the past year. Apparently, the Crone had told him the truth when she said he would have his answers and Zillah would be his. She became his wife, and between the 4 of them, they ruled Enoch together. And with that, we have the second generation. So there isn't much more information about them as individuals, which is a shame, honestly, because I'd really like to get into each of them more, even have their own episodes if I could, but there's just not a lot there. But yeah, especially Zillah, who does have other stories, and I would like to talk about her, so she's not just this wife character, but those stories will be more relevant once we start talking about other characters within the Law of Darkness, so she will come up again at least. Now, there are other stories about possible other children that Caine made. Before we move on, I want to talk about one of them. I want to talk about who are known in the Toreador clan book as the Two Lovers. Now, this story talks about a time before Caine reached the gates of Enoch. Instead, he had found his way to another tribe or settlement or city, and he had found these 2 lovers. Their names aren't mentioned. They're supposedly lost to time, and there is also a reason for that, which get into, but regardless, Cain saw these two lovers and saw in them all of the good that he had lost in killing Abel, in wandering out into the darkness of the land of Nod, in learning darkness from Lilith, turning away from God. All of this, he saw the mirror of that. He saw the antithesis of that in the love that these two shared for each other. The actual quote here is oddly romantic and is definitely from a Toreador book. They were two perfect lovers, devoted to each other, and Cain hoped by giving that love as a gift to eternity, he could mitigate the cruel deeds he had done in the past. It's hypothetically a really just wonderful, sweet story, and obviously one that will be ruined. This is the world of darkness after all. So yes, Cain turns both of these lovers, but before long they realize that by becoming vampires, they could no longer have children of their own. They could embrace others, they could create childer and other vampires, but would never have their own true child that they said would be the best of both of them. This became too much for either of them to bear, and they lay together one last time and waited for the sun to come up and destroy them. After this, Cain was so overcome with grief that he refused to ever speak their names again and vowed to never embrace another soul. It was less than one human generation before he turned Enosh, so who knows if his grief ran that deep. Back to the first city, the second generation were busy creating their own children. They did this without Cain's permission, and soon there were up to 200 vampires living amongst the mortals of the city. At least in the Book of Nod, it states that Cain's palace hosted up to 200 vampires, so there could have been less, there could have been more, but that is a lot of vampires. Especially in contrast to modern cities in the World of Darkness that don't hold anywhere near that many usually. The famous cities like New Orleans only host up to around 200 vampires during big festivals such as Mardi Gras. Enoch was truly a vampire city now. The worship of Big G God was forbidden, as was any other religion really, although there was a small temple within the city dedicated to our main girl Lilith. The use of flame torches was forbidden within the city, so as not to provoke Michael's curse and cause the frenzy known as, and please forgive my pronunciation, Roshchek. The mortals were left in complete darkness, while the vampires roamed the city with ease and started treating the humans however they wished. Now, Cain saw what was happening and saw how many vampires there were in the city, especially in ratio to the mortals. It said at one point there was one vampire for every 3 mortals, and Cain decided something needed to change. For the survival of the vampire species, let alone that of the mortals, something needed to change. See, at this time, Cain still saw humans as basically children under his care that had been around for a speck of time compared to him. He still called them children of Seth, seeing them as essentially long-descended nieces and nephews of a brother that he loved. So he created the rules of the Caini, which were as follows. No vampire was allowed to turn another without his permission. If they are given permission, they must think well that they are turning a worthy mortal. If you do turn, you will act as their sire, a teacher, a mentor, just as Adam had been to him and as Cain was to them. Essentially, no turning someone and abandoning them. No vampire on vampire killings. If this does happen, it is up to the sire to handle it. Otherwise, Cain will. Don't embrace out of revenge or punishment. Vampirism is a gift, and it should be given as such. In a similar vein, don't sire anyone who is diseased, insane, or essentially tainted in any way, as this may spread the entire line. Also, don't embrace anyone in love, for it would only wither under vampirism. Again, this is likely a rule he added due to his previous actions and grief over the two lovers. Finally, there can never be more vampires than mortals. Now, I mean, this one only made sense. Humans were the vampire's food supply, and so you couldn't have predator outnumbering prey. There are a few other rules in there, such as not embracing werewolves, but these were the main ones that Caine put in place regarding gifting anyone with vampirism and ways to mitigate the exponential growth of vampires within Enoch. Still, some vampires would be turned in secret. Some would still act out against each other. People would disobey Caine's laws, and usually they were punished. Most common punishment, at least for those extreme cases, being exile from the city. As I mentioned before, the world outside of Enoch's walls were full of dangers, full of monsters, and there were not as many human populations as there are now, so an exiled vampire could likely wander for weeks at a time before reaching another civilization, and that's if they didn't die first to starvation from lack of blood, the sun, or an angry demon they met along the way. These rules worked for a time, and the city of Enoch thrived. But nothing good lasts long in the world of darkness. It's not completely said why things changed so much for the worst. Maybe being treated as gods made the vampires believe that they were gods. Caine definitely included in this. Maybe the city was doomed from the start to eventually succumb to the darkness that dwelled inside their rulers. Either way, eventually the peaceful, benevolent shepherding of the children of Seth became something much more depraved. Humans once again became seen as cattle rather than people. Some humans were even selectively bred for certain purposes. If you were a strong fighter, or you could be fed from well and survive multiple feedings, then you might be taken to the Temple of Lilith that we mentioned earlier, where you would insert Marvin Gaye music here with another selected human before essentially never seeing them again. Even worse was the degradation of Caine and his palace. He named it the Dread Palace, and it would host multiple feasts throughout the year. These feasts would involve specifically selected mortals who would even be fed a mixture of herbs and tonics and various foods that would flavor their blood to vampires' liking. Above the feasting table itself, human criminals were bound to beams above a giant pool that laid across the feasting table, and they would slowly bleed into this pool so that vampires can indulge whenever they wished. The degradation of Enoch was a slow one. It did last for centuries, as far as we know, but some say that it was inevitable that this would end. Caine had gone from father to shepherd to tyrant, and his children had become nothing more than those monsters under the bed. Such sins, such degradation, wouldn't last forever, and the end of Enoch came from a catastrophic source. It was known as the Deluge, the great biblical flood that washed over humanity in the story of Noah and the Ark. It came and it destroyed all of Enoch and almost every single kindred that lived within it. The entire city was washed away, never to be seen again, at least not in the mortal world. There are stories of a version of Enoch that dwells within the underworld itself, its inhabitants even more strange than the vampires it was originally made for. We will get to that story in another episode. For now, what happened to Cain and his children? Enoch was lost, but there were those that survived the Great Flood. Cain, of course, Enosh, Zillah, and Irad all survived the city's downfall, as did 13 of the previous 200 of the third generation, who would come to be known as the Antediluvians. For Cain's part, he saw the flood as a punishment for his sins and for what Enoch had become. He hid himself away deep within the earth, no longer wishing to rule. He left his childhood to their own devices, at least for now, and he left it up to the second and third generation to take the ruins of Enoch and build something that became the second city. But that is a story for another time. Thank you so much for watching. I know there is a lot of information there, but I hope you found it easy enough to follow and enjoyed learning more about the lore. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and if there's something you think I've missed. There will likely be things I've missed because there is a lot of material, and like I've said, I am not an expert, so there will be things that don't make the video, and I'm always open to helpful feedback. Please join us next time when we'll be diving into the lore of the Antediluvians that will go on to create the famous vampire clans, and we'll discuss the fate of the second generation. Until then, stay safe, keep an eye on the shadows, and remember, in a world of darkness, the end is never truly the end.